Good morning. The book of Job simply tells the story of a man. In the words of the author in chapter 1 verse 3, this man was the greatest of all the people in the East. And in the words of God himself in chapter 1 verse 8, we read that there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. It would seem that Job had everything going for him: integrity, reputation, and health. But in an instant of time, the rug is pulled from under his feet and he loses everything. As if that was not enough, his body erupts, as we told in chapter 2 verse 7, in loathsome sores from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. And you sit back and say, wow, is this even possible? I mean, to lose everything in one moment of time? To fall from a state of happiness to utmost misery and degradation? How can someone be so unlucky? Or, to enter the mood of the book, what has this fellow done to deserve such treatment? While Job is literally blindfolded, as a reader we know better, because we have an insight into the behind-the-scenes manipulations of Satan, God's adversary. We know this is a test of faith, as if in a laboratory, the best man on earth suffering the greatest calamities. And the issue at stake is, does Job fear God for nothing? Because you see, according to Satan, Job only serves God because God protects him and blesses him. So here's my first question. Why do you serve God? And will you still serve him the day when disaster and death strike? Is your faith genuine and selfless? Another element that is clear from the behind-the-scenes encounters between God and Satan is that God is not the author of evil. Satan is. It is not God that causes tectonic plates to move, rivers to burst, or pandemics to leave a trail of devastation and death. And the reason I chose this sobering topic for today's message is that all around us we are being confronted with loss. Loss of loved ones, loss of jobs, loss of financial security, and loss of freedom to meet people, to hug and kiss the ones we love, and to go wherever we please. Yet, as the catastrophes unfold, Job remains faithful and cries out. We read in chapter 1 verse 21, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." But what follows is the blame game. But before we go there, let us just pause for a minute and consider what we know about the book of Job. Although Job is thought to be one of the oldest books ever written, which is part of the Bible canon, we are not sure when the book was exactly written and who is the author. The drama is placed in the land of Uz, somewhere in the Jordan Valley, but again the exact location is uncertain, because you see, it can happen anywhere to anyone. My tribulations are not unique, and in my humanity, I too identify with Job and the need for an answer to the problem of pain. Personally, I get comfort to think that the first words of revelation from God ever to be written were not about doctrines or laws, but addressed the issue of suffering. Now, we had left it at the blame game, and my question is, who do we blame when things go wrong? In my house one morning we discovered that the front door was left unlocked overnight. Rather than rejoicing in the fact that no one came into the house and the computers were all still there, the question on everyone's lips was, who forgot to lock the door? Who was the last one in? In other words, who is responsible when things go wrong? The first character to engage in the blame game in this account is Job's wife. In Job chapter 2 verse 9 we read, "Then his wife said to him, 'Do you still persist in your integrity?' And then the chilling words, 'Curse God and die.' For this, Job's wife has received a lot of bad press during the centuries, or shall I say millennia, and yet what it echoes to me is the extent of her suffering. So before we are too severe on Job's wife, let us remember that the oxen and the camels were hers too. Perhaps some were even her family's dowry when she first married Job. The 10 children on whom the roof collapsed were her babies, her pride and joy. And on the floor, amidst the ashes, is her dear husband, covered in horrific wounds and begging for a piece of pottery to scratch himself. This man was not only the love of her life, but her protector and provider in a society where a woman depended on a male relative for survival. So before we criticize Job's wife, let us remember that her loss was unimaginable. And then Job's friends arrive and their blame game follows, albeit a little bit more sophisticated. It is woven in theology, or if you like, in church language. We know these friends from their elaborate speeches, but that is not how it starts. In chapter 2, verse 11, we are told that the friends meet together to go and comfort Job. But when they get there, verse 13, we read, "They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great." As long as they kept silent, they did nothing wrong. The problem begins when they start speaking. Their poetry is beautiful, but their theology is just not applicable. In their worldview, you get what you deserve. What goes round comes round. So taking turns, they all proclaim the God of their tradition, who rewards the just and punishes the wicked. And then they take the logical step, concluding that Job's extreme suffering must betray some serious unconfessed sin. And if only Job stopped being so stubborn and repented, then God would surely pardon and restore him. When Jesus walked the face of the earth, many followed that same theology. That is why handicapped people were ostracized, lepers cursed, blind people called sinners. But my question is, do we still play the same blame game? Do we judge people by their appearance or lack of health? Do we judge them by their wealth and success, or rather their lack of it? Despite his ordeal, Job finds the strength to refute his friends' accusations. He protests his integrity and innocence, he requests the impossible, to be heard and to be spoken to by the Almighty himself. We read it in chapter 31, verse 35, where near the end of his words he says, "Here is my signature, let the Almighty answer me." And that request God is going to answer. He's going to answer it in a dramatic turn of events, where we read in Job 38, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind." Trapped in the midst of the drama, Job and his friends see nothing else but suffering. God does not address Job's condition, but is going to reveal to Job the marvelous order of the universe, expanding his range of vision. God's words soothe Job's desperation. His doubts melt away in the face of his presence, knowledge, and power. God says that he is not pleased with Job's friends, but he is pleased with Job. At a time when Job was feeling most abandoned, God elevates him as an example of faith. In the same way, we too live in ignorance of the behind-the-scenes workings of the cosmic conflict between good and evil. And our vision is limited and often skewed by our personal struggles. But perhaps one of the most important lessons of Job is that the actions and faith responses of each one of us in the face of adversity matter. Not only to ourselves and others, but amazingly to God himself. And so, from the book of Job, I learned that God is not the author of evil. I learned that it is not this side of heaven we will understand why good and innocent people suffer and die in earthquakes, of cancer, in tsunamis or car accidents, or why so many duty-bound, loving citizens lay down their lives in the NHS, care homes, and essential services to save us from COVID-19. I learned that God hears my cries. He does not shy away from my plea and calms the storm within me. And finally, I learned that God is ultimately in control of the world and that there will be an end to suffering. Amen.